Welcome, everybody. This is Mike Antich. I'm the editor of Automotive Fleet magazine, and want to thank you for joining us for our webinar that's going to be dealing with the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic on fleet new vehicle ordering and deliveries. This event and webinar is sponsored by Enterprise Fleet Management and Geotab, and it's organized jointly by Automotive Fleet and the Automotive Fleet and Leasing Association. So with that, I'd like to introduce the panelists, our subject matter experts who are going to be with us today. The first is Steve Armstrong. He's Manufacturing Relations Manager for Mike Albert Fleet Solutions.
Good afternoon, everybody. Calling from Cincinnati, Ohio. Hope you're having a great day.
Thank you, Steve. And next is Tim Single. He's a Senior Procurement Manager for Wheels, Inc.
Hello, everybody. Tim Single calling from Wheels, and we're in the Chicagoland area. Good afternoon.
Okay, thank you, Tim. Next is Ted Davis, Vice President of North American Supply Chain for ARI.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for having me, Mike, calling in from South Jersey.
Okay. Then our next subject matter expert is Cindy Gomez, Vice President of Vehicle Acquisition Services for Donlen.
Good afternoon, everyone. Cindy Gomez with Donlen, calling you from sunny Chicago.
Very good. And then last but not least, our next subject matter expert is Angie Lauer. She's Assistant Vice President for Enterprise Fleet Management.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm excited to be here. I'm calling from St. Louis, Missouri.
Very good. So with that, let's start our discussion. And probably the best place to start is by giving an assessment of where we currently stand. And I'd like to turn this session over, or this discussion over initially to Cindy Gomez, and where you'd be able to let us know what is the status of 2020 model year fleet orders.
Absolutely. Thank you, Mike. So this is Cindy Gomez, and I'm sure you guys would all agree, but I would never have imagined that I would ever see a pandemic, at least in my lifetime. COVID-19 has not only disrupted our personal lives, but many of our industries as well. And as you know, we've experienced plant closures from basically all OEMs. And as of right now, I cannot confidently say when these plants will reopen. But we are receiving information from multiple OEMs, and some are telling us that they plan to reopen and are providing a tentative date. But unfortunately, those dates continue to push further out as governors continue to enforce stay-at-home orders. And other OEMs are not providing any date at this particular time until things stabilize. So things are changing daily, and again, it is difficult for us to know exactly when the plants are actually going to reopen until they actually do. So when we look at this situation, we need to understand really the impact that this issue is having, not only on your business from an order to delivery standpoint, but also from a potential financial aspect as well. Now, based on communications that I personally had with several of the OEMs, their goal is to build all orders that they have received thus far. However, they cannot guarantee that those orders will be placed. And they are also committing to processing these orders by prioritizing fleet orders versus retail. So I commend them on that. But what we have to expect and look at is as these plants continue to stay closed over the next 2 months, we typically see those model year changeover where plants are closing again. So what I'm expecting to happen or to see happening is 2 things. OEMs will begin converting vehicles from 2020 model year to 2021, or canceling the 2020 orders and requesting 2021 model years to be placed in its place. So now if this happens, there's a few things that you'll need to keep in mind and prepare for. So if your order is converted to a 2021 model year, again, I would expect you to see longer lead times, but I also expect there to be some financial implications as well. And some things that you really need to consider are, if you have a volume incentive program with the OEMs, by switching over to a new model year, is that vehicle now going to be included in your current program year, or is it going to fall into your next program year? If it falls into your next program year, will that have implications to your minimum order count for this program year? So again, do you need to start negotiating for your 2021 model year programs now? Do you need to add the 2020 model year vehicle onto your current 2020 program? So you need to consider all of those items when vehicles are being canceled and or being converted from one model year to another.
Mm-hmm.
We are also seeing some transportation delays from some OEMs due to the plant closures, right? And so for some units that are produced and ready to ship, they are stuck at the plants. So every OEM has a different process, and the impact on their vehicles may vary. But what I can say is OEMs have the ability, some OEMs are allowing transporters to come onto their facilities and continue shipping their vehicles to the appropriate locations, whether it's a dealer or upfitter. But then there's some OEMs based on plant location and or just the plant closure itself, where transporters do not have access to those vehicles. And so what we're seeing in some instances is where those units are produced and ready to ship, but cannot leave the plant at this particular time. So again, there's multiple things that are occurring that's going to impact your order to delivery, potentially your finances, and things you need to consider as we move through these challenging times.
Mm-hmm. That's an excellent point that you bring up in regards to the volume incentive programs and how you count those vehicles. I did get one notification here. We are seeing some glimmer of hope. Hyundai in their South Korean operations have reopened production, but their U.S.-based Alabama plant does remain closed. So let me turn it over to Steve Armstrong. Any additional points that you'd like to add in regards to the current status of 2020 fleet orders?
Thanks, Mike. That was an outstanding summary, Cindy. Mine will be much shorter than that. We're concerned, and most of our clients are concerned about what is going to be the new delivery window for their existing orders. The manufacturers are trying to figure that out. The FMCs are trying to figure that out. We're trying to give the best information we can to the clients so they can make their plans and know what's going to happen over the next 5 or 6 months. There's only one manufacturer that has distributed a startup plan and reslotted production for specific time frames as we move forward over the next 3 or 4 months, and that's very helpful. I think in the short term, the other manufacturers will start to get to that point also. So I think within another 60 days, this will be a much easier project. It'll be a little easier to decide what we're going to do. I think what concerns me the most is there are so many non-Tier 1 producers involved in this process, and any single one of those Tier 1 or Tier 2 producer or Tier 2 or Tier 3 producers has a problem, can't start up. That's going to slow down the production of the vehicle. So that's very concerning to me. Anything along the lines would impact the delivery of new vehicles. So I think that's about all I have on that subject, Mike.
Okay, and Tim Single, any additional commentary that you'd like to make?
Yeah, Mike, just to talk a little bit about the plants. As Steve and Cindy had mentioned, most every plant in North America is currently shut down, and this is one of the first times that's happened. And, reopening the plants is not going to be easy. It's not going to be the situation where they just pick up and start where they left off. The UAW is going to need to continue their negotiations on safety practices, and they need to figure out how to operate in a capacity that will greatly reduce any chances of COVID-19 spreading within their facilities. They'll need to increase health screening and testing of workers, implement new distancing measures, and possibly spread out the lines by moving workstations. We believe this is going to lead to a lower overall capacity to build vehicles. They may have to reduce the number of workers, reduce shifts, and even may be able to quarantine any sick workers within the facility. These measures will remove some of the redundancies that allow the plants to work around the clock, 2 or 3 shifts a day. We also are thinking about the parts suppliers who basically shut down around the same time. We know the assembly plants utilize just-in-time inventory, and so that means they likely don't have additional supplies laying around. The parts suppliers will need to start up earlier or about the same time as the plants to keep inventory flowing properly. Never before has this really happened, where all of the assembly plants closed as well as the suppliers, and they all need to restart around the same time. And there's a lot of challenges that are going to come with that.
All right, very good. Thank you, Tim. Have been getting other feedback from attendees. Volvo indicates that it's reopened its European production, and the South Carolina plant is due to open in May 11th. With that, let's go into another area impacting the supply chain in terms of vehicle ordering, and that is with upfitting. And it's had a huge impact in terms of our upfitting of vehicles. And would like to start off that discussion with Ted Davis from ARI, and who also owns Auto Truck Upfitting. So with that, Ted, is there any feedback or updates that you could provide to the attendees?
Good afternoon, Mike. Certainly. Unlike the OEMs that had a significant impact, what we've seen so far during the COVID-19 pandemic is that upfitters have fared a little better. So early on, we saw upfitters across the board close or partially close as they navigated the waters of are they essential business or not. But I think as things have stabilized over the last 4 to 6 weeks, what we've seen is that a fair portion, 70% or so, are up and operating normally. I know our operations at Auto Truck have continued to operate normally throughout the issue. Or we've also seen some that have a slight modification in their schedule to support social distancing. But for the most part, they've seen minimal impact to things like parts availability. And obviously, many had a fair bit of on-ground inventory to continue to build on. I think that's where the biggest opportunity comes with upfitters. And when we talk about turn times or short-term impact, for the vehicles that were currently on the ground at the upfitters, turn times seem to be about normal. And that would be without taking into consideration any transport constraints, but just their ability to generate throughput seems to be relatively unimpacted. Where I think the delays we're going to see is downstream, and that is if OEM production doesn't pick up soon and we can't get more chassis on the ground, upfitters are going to run out of inventory to build on. So that's going to create some potential large delays in the industry.
Have you been experiencing any chassis shortages to date?
To date, no, we have not. We have chassis on ground that we're building on, but we're certainly taking a look at that in the coming weeks and months, and we're hoping that OEM production starts soon. As Cindy alluded to earlier, we're certainly getting indications that the OEMs are starting to target some opening dates, so we're looking forward to seeing those chassis roll on ground.
So, Angie, what's Enterprise's experience in working with upfitters on behalf of your clients? What kind of report might you be able to offer to attendees?
Yeah, very similar to what Ted just outlined. Most are operational. A good deal are operating with limiting staff to comply with social distancing guidelines, so, staggered shifts and things like that. We're not hearing of any skilled labor constraints at this time. They have the staff they need. Even though when the OEMs reopen and they start to get more vehicles shipped, we think that they may not be operating at 100% efficiency if they stick with some of those guidelines and having to have staggered shifts to comply with social distancing. So we're keeping an eye on that, but I agree with what Ted said. One other topic I'd like to bring up is the upfitter bailment pools. So these have historically been really good options for our clients with immediate needs for vehicles. And in the very early stages of this pandemic, we saw a very high demand for vehicles in those bailment pools. So many upfitters are reporting depleted inventory, particularly for popular models, and they haven't been able to replace that inventory with the manufacturers being shut down. So we're hoping that when things get moving again, they can replenish those bailment pools as our clients are wanting to take advantage of them.
Now, the thing that I'm hearing anecdotally from fleet managers that I deal with is that there's still transportation constraints. If a unit has been upfitted, the auxiliary equipment installed or mounted on that body, are there any constraints on getting those vehicles out of the upfitter plants and back into the OEM distribution system? Have any of you been experiencing that? Go ahead.
Yeah, so this is Angie from Enterprise. We have had some challenges. One option that we have been using is to take that transportation into our own hands. So instead of putting it back into that OEM system, which is a challenge, we use our own transportation to pick up that vehicle and get it in the hands of our client. A little more pricey, but at the same time for clients, especially those in essential services, that's important to get it to them. So we've been taking advantage of those options.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Any other commentary in regards to the upfit situations that fleets may be encountering? I know Steve, Mike Albert has an upfitting portion to its company. What are you guys experiencing?
Oh, thanks, Mike. I think that was covered really well. Our problem isn't getting the work done. Our problem can be getting the parts in to get the work done. And then, and like the others, we have a transportation system also that we utilize to try to get the vehicles to the clients as fast as they want. Some clients don't want a delayed delivery, and some need it right now to do their business. So I agree with everything that those folks said. We experience the same issues.
Okay. So in terms of the next chain in order to delivery that we'll be looking at would be the logistics aspect, licensing and titling of vehicles, and also the dealer component in particular with the courtesy delivery programs that are out there. Let me start off with the first one dealing with logistics, and I believe Cindy, you were looking to address that.
Yes. So from a logistics standpoint, as we talk about utilizing transportation companies and processing turnkey delivery, where vehicles are being delivered with inspections completed and DOT inspections for medium and heavy duty assets and delivered with plates on those units, there's been some issues and constraints there as well. A couple situations that we are experiencing is DMV closures. So having the ability to perform those license and titling and obtaining those plates prior to delivering those vehicles has been challenging. And how we're overcoming some of those situations is by placing a temporary tag on those units prior to them being delivered and then following up with DMVs once they are open. We are tracking on a regular basis as to which DMVs are extending the temp tag expiration date. That varies based on state as well. So again, from a logistics standpoint, there's a lot to consider in being able to obtain those necessary inspections because also inspection facilities are also closed, and then obtaining the proper plating to deliver some of these more medium and heavy commercial vehicles that require plates in order for business to be done. So that's kind of from a logistics standpoint, some of the issues that we're experiencing.
What about perennially we experience issues with rail car shortages, car hauler delays, or ramp constraints? Any of those issues factoring in today's environment?
Yes, so this is Cindy Gomez. Yes, there are situations in regards to rail car shortages. I want to say that it's more based on the plants and the location as well as the asset type. So vehicles being built out of Mexico, we do see longer lead times from a shipping perspective because a lot of things are being routed up via ship. And so we're seeing extended delivery times for those type of assets built in plants in Mexico. the the high roof type of cargo vans, we also experience order to delivery challenges from there as well. But again, some plants are just backlogged, and so we are feeling the pain of the congested rail car restraints that we have for certain asset types as well.
Mm-hmm. Go ahead.
Hi, Mike. This is Steve.
Go ahead, Steve.
Sorry, Mike. Yeah, I agree 100%. There was rail car issues. There's been rail car issues for 10 years, and it's going to be an issue for all the manufacturers, especially the ones coming out of Mexico, like she said. That some of the manufacturers are trying to. They're getting other ways to get cars shipped besides that already. So they were already using alternate logistics prior to the COVID-19 pandemic. So it's going to be logical. It's going to take them a while to work through the backlog. My concern would be more that there's more profitable ways for railroad companies to make money than moving cars. We experienced that back in 09, 08 during the recession, and I would foresee that coming back again. So we'll have to watch this very carefully on the rail car shortages.
Yeah,
Thank you.
Yeah, that's definitely been a perennial issue, but there's a new dimension that's being added to it with this current situation we're in. During the shutdown phase, which most of us are still in, some companies were allowed to remain open that were regarded as essential businesses. As we're moving into the opening up the economy, restarting the economy, is there been any sort of discussions that you might have had with railroad companies or any indication that during the startup, there may be designations as to what essential products and services are that need to be moved first in order to restart the economy quicker? And if so, where would fleet cars or automobiles in general fit into that equation? Anybody want to take that on? What's your thoughts, Ted? Since you're dealing with supply chain in general.
Yeah, Mike, thanks. I don't necessarily have the answer to where folks would think that they fall from a priority perspective, but I do think that the best thing that we can do as an industry as a whole is to work together and make sure that we use our proper lobbying voices, whether it's ALA or the AAMV, just to make sure that we are having our voice heard around the critical nature of what we do and how these fleet vehicles themselves may not be considered independently critical compared to something like PPE. But when you look at them from a different perspective as they may be delivering that PPE and they get to their final destination, I think that's one of the biggest things that we need to make, and a point that we all as an industry need to go with one common voice to the legislation with.
Okay.
And Mike, this is Cindy Gomez. I also want to just reiterate something. The OEMs are doing their due diligence by trying to think outside the box and actually hire outside transport companies to pick up these vehicles and deliver them where they need to. So I will commend each one of them for that. The challenge that we face is the training aspect of it, where their transporters that they're utilizing are providing inaccurate data, such as delivering vehicles to an upfitter when it was actually delivered to a dealership, missed ship-throughs, things of that scenario. And so as we move through this process and rail car shortage continues to be a impact on the delivery piece, and OEMs utilize more transport carriers or third-party vendors, we need them to work a little bit better on the logistics side to make sure that we know where those vehicles are at within the delivery process to avoid any further delays. And that's the challenge that I would give to the OEM team.
Okay. Well, let's move this discussion along and take a deeper look into the situation with dealers. And would like to pose that question to Angie, if you might be able to give us an update as to what's going on that section of the order to delivery cycle.
Sure. Yeah, so I'll start by saying that the OEMs have done a really nice job communicating with us, and they communicate on a daily basis, the dealerships that are closed or constrained. We were excited to see last week the federal government deem dealerships as essential services, and so perhaps as a result of this, we are seeing dealers who were previously completely shut down. We couldn't get a hold of anyone. They're now starting to partially reopen to some degree. We can get someone on the phone to respond to our inquiries. Probably to no one's surprise, the most difficult states or challenging states as far as dealerships go are in California, particularly in the San Francisco market, Michigan, Pennsylvania, New York, and New Jersey. Bottom line, in many cases, we're not getting updates like we used to when vehicles arrive at dealers' lots, and we're having difficulty getting vehicles PDI'd in time, that pre-delivery inspection, so we can get it delivered to our customer. And these delays are mainly because our courtesy delivery contacts aren't on the ground. They're not at the dealership. They're working from home. And so they can't check it into the system or walk the lot to find a vehicle. So to get things moving, it just requires a lot more follow-up and tenacity than in the past. We like to say we're getting scrappy. Some examples of success is contacting service managers and general managers at the dealerships to enlist their help in getting vehicles delivered, and we've had some success with that. It just becomes really important, especially with clients in essential services. We're also leveraging our local presence in our markets across the country, and so we've had cases where we've been able to get our local administrative or sales staff to physically go to the dealership and pick up that vehicle to get it in the hands of our clients. So it is a little challenging. It's starting to get a little better, but it just requires more follow-up and more tenacity to make it work.
Mm-hmm. What strategies are you employing, and I pose this to everyone, in terms of vehicles that are stranded at a dealer because the dealer is closed or it may only be open for service? How are you dealing with that?
A couple things. A lot of times you can get that service manager on the phone to do the PDI and then have either a third-party transporter or in Enterprise's cases, we have local people on the ground to come pick that up and get it in the hands of the dealer. Usually if you get the right person, they're trying to be as helpful as possible. We have very few cases where they're just completely stranded and we can't get a hold of anyone. We do have some like that, but not completely.
Well, and let's turn the discussion over now to the courtesy delivery system. And what is the status of that? And I'd like to ask Tim to address that situation.
Yeah, Mike. It's a good question. Typically, we see sort of a natural process happen where a vehicle gets delivered to a dealership. The dealership receives our paperwork with all the instructions. They reach out, they call the driver. The driver comes to pick up the vehicle, and that happens very naturally. And we've seen that basically fall apart. Part of that being most dealerships have sent their their sales staff home, and they only have a service department working. They are, in some cases, working, via appointment only. So we have been able to, work with some of the contacts of the dealerships to come in and actually physically deliver vehicles. But generally, it's fallen apart. And so what we've done is we put together sort of a task force of folks throughout the organization that are, not as busy with their current activities, and put them on the phone, calling dealers, emailing dealers, and we're trying to work through those constraints to get as many vehicles delivered as possible. And we're running into all sorts of issues like, DMVs are closed. You have drivers that are, afraid to go into the dealership and pick up the vehicle because they're afraid that the vehicle's not, cleaned, or they might contract the COVID. So, a lot of concern there, a lot of constraints, but we've been able to work through it for the most part, and I think we're having some pretty good success. And I think, we're starting to see dealerships start to reopen. As Angie said, we're getting these great lists from the OEMs that provide status of, who's working, who's not working. They give us, some alternate contacts and all sorts of great information. So we refer back to those. And so we know, who do we reach out to and how do we get that done? And we've sort of built a decision tree for the team to say, okay, well, you call the dealer, you get somebody on the phone, then you have to work through what are their capabilities, can they prep and deliver the vehicle, can they do the license and title, if not, can they send the paperwork back to us so that we can do that. In certain states, we've just held off on sending anything out to the dealer until we've already made contact with them. So a lot of activity around courtesy delivery.
Mm-hmm. And how are you addressing the issue with the DMV closures or reduced hours or operating on an appointment-only basis? How are you dealing with, or how is Wheels dealing with that on behalf of its clients, Tim?
It's a combination. Some states were able to do electronically or online, so those can continue. In some states we're able to provide either, hard plates or temp tags that at least can facilitate the delivery, and with the hopes of, the DMVs opening up soon, and then we can work to get the permanent plates for those vehicles. And then, some dealerships or some counties are still open and still are able to do license and title.
Mm-hmm. Well, let's segue our conversation in the next area, which is, in my opinion, probably the area that's going to be impacting the industry the most, and that's the remarketing backlog and the overall softness in resale values that's occurring as a result of dealer business being down. And I'd like to have Steve lead us in that conversation. Mike Albert has a lot of closed-end leases in its portfolio, which really gives you skin in the game in terms of this market. How are you reading what's going on in the remarketing industry, and any short-term forecasts that you might be able to provide, Steve?
Okay, thanks, Mike. I'll give that a go. As we all know, many physical auctions are closed and remain closed. Most of the more technologically advanced ones, however, are doing simulcasts or online platforms to try and sell cars every week. The rate is under 20% even on those, so there's just not as many people buying the cars. Physical auction companies have been pushing for a long time for simulcast and online. It's cheaper, it's safer. It's just a better way to do business. This is probably, unfortunately, something that's going to just make that more prevalent as we move forward. Obviously, with dealers not selling a lot of vehicles right now, they pause buying vehicles from the auction. So you still have off-lease cars coming up, off-rental cars coming up. Many of the large buyers like a CarMax or a Drive Time, they've done layoffs, and they're not buying cars either. And those people buy thousands and thousands and thousands of cars a month. So it just keeps creating an ever-growing backlog of off-lease, off-rental fleet, repossessed vehicle inventory, and that's going to continue to grow until some level of normalcy returns to this part of the industry. Getting vehicles to the auction and back to the dealers if they do buy them is challenging for all the same reasons. In some markets, auctions aren't able to go out and pick up units. In others, they're not staffed enough in that area, and they don't have the people to get the job done. So it's going to be challenging. It's going to be challenging for a long time.
Mm-hmm. So with these challenges, I'd like to pose this question to Tim and or the group as a whole. Are your clients looking at alternative remarketing channels, in particular dealers or driver sales, or selling direct to dealers with your vehicles? What are you experiencing in this area, Ted?
Thanks, Mike. So I will say for the month of March, right when the impact was felt initially, we saw a significant uptick in what we would call upstream sales, led by the direct sale back to the employees. So in a range of about 50% increase. We have started to see that flatten off, but we're constantly getting inquiries about opportunities to sell fleets in a different manner than the traditional wholesale marketplace. Also, we're also seeing some companies that are looking at cash flow opportunities or potential ways to generate interim cash flow and looking to just outright potentially package their vehicles and sell even at a price below wholesale, and then allowing someone else to take the risk to do that and push those vehicles through the wholesale market. I echo everything that Steve just said around remarketing in general. What we've seen in our remarketing portfolio is that the industry itself has really been led by the smaller the smaller independent auction network who are tending to come back online faster than maybe some of the bigger players in the industry. Hopefully, using that entrepreneurial spirit to create some innovative ways to get the industry the spark it needs to continue, because it is going to be a significant uphill battle to not only get auctions open and to have to worry about lower resale values, but also just to get the inventory through. Because not only is COVID impacting every industry, there's other industry pressures going on now in the world. For instance, oil prices, which is also driving some decisions to be made when it comes to off-lease product and remarketed vehicles.
Well, ARI also has a chain of dealerships. What are you hearing from your dealer colleagues in terms of vehicles that they're looking to move to auction, and what type of feedback are you getting there?
I haven't got a whole lot of feedback from the dealerships now. Obviously, they're dealing with closures, and many of our dealerships are in states that are the hardest hit, being California and New Jersey. So getting back to new car sales online, appointment only has really been a focus. But in some brief conversations we've had lately, it's really about the other way. It's about how do we find the right vehicles to re-inventory ourselves with as the economy opens back up. Because, not understanding what new car manufacturer production will look like and how that production can support the retail side of the car industry, you have to have cars to sell, whether they'll be new or used. So it's really, I think, a fine line around what the inventory needs to look like at your retail dealerships, and how long and when do you make those decisions to either buy or sell.
Okay, yeah, thank you, Ted. Now, Enterprise has a unique remarketing program as to how it disposes of off-lease units or its rent-a-cars. Could you talk to what you're experiencing on the Enterprise side, Angie?
Yeah, sure. I think on the enterprise side, our primary avenue or resale chain is dealers, and we'll continue to do that. But just as Steve and Ted were saying, we continue to leverage a multi-channel resale approach just to make sure that we're maximizing the resale value for clients. Like you mentioned, we do have a dedicated remarketing team that are at the local level in 50 different markets, so they're on the ground actively selling our vehicles to dealers and online. So, it's a challenging environment for certainly right now, but we feel good about the strategy we have in place to when this starts get back going again.
Mm-hmm.
Hi, Mike.
Go ahead. Yeah, Cindy.
Sorry, this is Cindy Gomez. I also wanted to kind of explain a little bit on this subject as well. There are corporations. We partner with Hertz to do direct dealer sales as well. And on top of that, we are seeing better resale value when we sell through those channels. Hertz does have a footprint nationally of retail dealerships that we utilize through their fleet as well. So definite opportunity there as well.
Okay, excellent. Let's go to our next area, which I think is an area that a lot of the attendees probably have the most interest, is kind of that looking forward. A lot of us are experiencing all of the issues that we've addressed now, but what sort of advice might you give to those fleet managers in terms of their near-term strategies in dealing with fleet ordering constraints or order-to-delivery delays? And would like to turn that over to you, Tim, to see what advice you might be able to give. Are you there, Tim? Let me turn it over then to Steve. Steve, any advice?
Yep. Yeah. Okay. Thanks, Mike. I don't know what happened to Tim. We're constantly actively consulting with our clients to try to figure out what their short-term needs are. We're utilizing our rental department, the national rental companies, in trying to make recommendations on what we anticipate will have a shorter order to delivery time. They just need something to get through until that happens. What's concerning, again, kind of going back to where we were talking about residuals, is a prolonged soft used vehicle market. Until the retail dealership activity resumes and we pick up speed and the glut of off-lease vehicles are worked through, you're likely to see a softening of used car values in the near term. So new car supply may help with this, but it may not. It depends on how fast people are going to go back to work and what manufacturers do with incentives. Traditionally, used cars become more attractive as their price falls in a down economy compared to new vehicles. So there's hope for a prolonged recovery. Nonetheless, if vehicles stay down for too long, it's definitely going to impact residual values and result in potentially higher lease payments. A way to counteract that may be lease extensions or revisions. They may make more sense in the short term. What we don't want to do is start basing our sale prices on vehicles sold off of a lower MMR value. We don't want that. We call that resetting the bar. We want to try to make sure that we're giving our clients the best information that we can to hold or sell or get a new vehicle.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, one of the issues that I see is the unemployment numbers are just unbelievable. 20 million plus people being unemployed, and many of those that are unemployed are people that were working in service industries, and in many cases, those were really the prime buyers of out-of-service fleet vehicles. So the very people that we would be selling to as an industry, many of those people are unemployed and may not have the wherewithal to replace that vehicle with a used vehicle. So how much of an impact do you think that will continue to have on our industry? And maybe turning that over to Angie, your thoughts on that area.
So, I mean, we have a lot of service industries that are, kind of evaluating their fleet as they go along. A lot of our service industries are actually up-fleeting. It just depends on what industry, and Enterprise has such a wide variety of our customer base in a lot of different industries. So we have had a good example of a company that was a service industry. They had 2 of their employees in every truck that they had, and because of social distancing requirements, they decided to put each employee in their own truck, and so they use short-term rental needs from us to supplement their fleet. So we're seeing things like that where they actually need to up-fleet and get more vehicles in their fleet. And for those that maybe need to defleet because they don't need all those vehicles, those are individual conversations with those clients to evaluate what works best for them in that scenario. So it's really a case-by-case basis depending on that specific client.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I've been hearing that also in terms of companies that in the past relied a lot on transporting work crews in a single vehicle, moving away from that. Do you see that being as more of a temporary solution to address these social distancing concerns, or do you see that as, or any of you see that as more of a long-term trend where there may be less desire to transport crews and corporate edicts to have fewer people per vehicle, resulting in more future orders?
I think that's a little hard to say. What we're hearing from clients is it's at least something they intend to keep doing through, the end of the summer, perhaps the end of the year. I think everyone's playing it by ear a little bit, and when do these guidelines get eased a little bit as regards to social distancing. So it's really hard to tell if this becomes permanent, but I think it's definitely what the world we're living in maybe for the rest of 2020.
Mm-hmm. I think one of the points that was touched upon was the use of short-term rentals on meeting this shortage that we currently have in new vehicles. And I know several, such as Donlan being its parent company is Hertz, Angie with Enterprise and Enterprise Rent-A-Car being a key component of your company. What is the viability of short-term rentals in meeting companies' upfleeting needs? And And let me start off with Cindy, since Angie, you were talking last, and then we'll come back to you. What is Donlen Hertz's strategy in this area, Cindy?
Yes, thanks, Mike. So our strategy is basically evaluating each fleet and really working with our strategic consulting group to determine what type of assets are needed, and then utilizing our bridge rentals to bridge the gap between when these vehicles will be delivered, meaning the vehicles that are sitting at plants are not produced, and determining if a rental makes sense for specific clients. We also take a look and evaluate and determine should any orders be canceled and replaced with the softening of the used vehicle market, right? Hertz and Donlen have a program where we can acquire used vehicles within Hertz's inventory to offset some of these challenges as well. And so between either evaluating the rental capabilities and or acquiring short-term leases through Hertz's inventory is what our strategic consulting groups will take a look, evaluate the need, and ensure that we are taking a more proactive approach for our clients in regards to those aspects.
Mm-hmm. And Steve, did you want to add anything additional to the use of short-term rentals to supplement any sort of upfitting needs or upfleeting needs that a fleet may have?
Thanks, Mike. I could not use the words any better than Cindy used them. That's exactly what we do. That's exactly what works. There's a lot of opportunity there. It works for some clients. It doesn't work for other clients. But we have a group also that looks at that and to determine whether that's a viable option. And we found that it's been a viable option, not just in the COVID, but just as a normal order of business. So, Cindy, that was perfect. Thank you.
Well, let's circle back to my original question. Tim has rejoined us. So with that, Tim, the question that we're looking to get answered is any sort of near-term strategies that you might be recommending to fleet managers who are dealing with these ordering constraints and order-to-delivery delays. What advice are you giving and is Wheels giving to its client base?
Yeah, thanks, Mike. Sorry I dropped off there for a minute. In the near term, I think that's where most of our client or customer focus is right now. We are in an interesting position where the plants are completely shut down, and most of our customers are essentially done with their model year ordering. So their vehicles on order are orders placed that they need. And they're concerned that those vehicles might be delayed. We've had a lot of conversation with the OEMs to try to understand what the delay looks like. Is it really, 5 to 6 weeks, which is, essentially what the plants may be down for, or is it more than that? And I think it may be more than that as, the plants do come back online. They'll do it in a limited capacity. They may also build less retail vehicles because we know there's going to be a softening market and less demand for retail. So that might help. And the manufacturers, they're going to try to prioritize fleet vehicles and try to build those first. So really trying to understand what the delay is in the short term is difficult. We've asked the manufacturers for their input, and they've been great to work with, really helpful, and they've answered questions where they can, but I think they're also, in the dark a little bit when it comes to what's actually going to happen over the coming weeks.
Mm-hmm.
So that leaves our customers with sorry about that. That leaves our customers with a decision, right? So if they're in a position where they need vehicles now, so they're, an essential service, their fleet is still, working, maybe they're supporting, the medical services or delivering, medical supplies or working in the healthcare industry or for other reasons, they need vehicles right away. They have to take a step back and really analyze, what are their options. And so they can look at out of stock, but one of the issues there is the dealerships are closed for the most part, and it's difficult to buy a vehicle right now, and inventory is low at many of the dealerships. We talked about rental as an option. Rental is an option for those who need a vehicle right away, but it doesn't really work if somebody has a service truck or needs upfitting, right? And the other option is just to keep their vehicles in service longer, and so that's a good option. And one of the downfalls to that is an increase in maintenance costs as they keep the vehicles longer. So we need to work with our customers and guide them as to when is the appropriate time to pull the trigger and replace those vehicles.
Mm-hmm. And one of the things that Tim touched upon was low retail demand as we start moving or reopening the economy. One of the attendees here sent a question, and the question reads, how much of an impact will reduced travel and or rental car utilization have on fleet orders? And with two of the panelists whose overall parent companies are involved in the rental side, I'd like to see if they might be able to address this question. Any feedback there, Angie?
So what I'm seeing so far is they're using it to supplement their fleet at this point, and just for the short term, like we were talking about earlier, for 2020 or at least through the summer months. So short term, they won't order those vehicles. They'll use those short term rentals. But I think that's probably not a great long-term strategy. It is not a great long-term strategy. So what we're encouraging for our clients is you've got to evaluate your fleet. What do you need short-term, mid-term, long-term, based on your projections for your specific business, avoiding knee-jerk reactions and overreacting to the immediate problem, and then coming up with a plan. What is your fleet strategy over the next few months and then years? In the past, we've seen work trucks and vans have been really challenging to find out of dealer stock, and we don't really see this changing. It could be difficult to find in rental fleets. That's also expensive. So, you need to get a solid plan for ordering these vehicles when it will become important. So I think it's all about strategy and planning for our clients.
Yeah. The other aspect, I think, to this question from the attendee is if travel is down, will that also mean that rental business in general is down, resulting in fewer rental orders to the factories? And might that have a positive impact on, let's say, commercial fleet orders? And turn that over to you, Cindy. How would you address that, or what are your thoughts on that?
Yes, Mike. So in regards to the transportation industry being down as a whole, I think it could be a positive impact in the rental industry. As I've mentioned before, right, we at Hertz, our partner company, has acquired and has several cargo vans and trucks readily available. And where we see the biggest need at this point in time are those service delivery type industries who are delivering key essential items to people, right? And so we have the availability of those short-term rentals to get those clients in there. Also, I wanted, again, to just point out that in regards to supplementing a short-term rental, we can also acquire these vehicles also that are in the inventory. Now that the market is a bit softer, it's low mileage vehicles. OEM warranty is still available on these assets, and so there's an opportunity from a short-term lease process to acquire some of those assets in the interim as well. So.
Mm-hmm. Well, with the topic of this section of our presentation being a roadmap on near-term and long-term strategies that fleets might want to consider, obviously, we can't predict what the future is going to hold, but we can look at different scenarios and solicit advice from the panel as to how fleets might want to react. One scenario that's out there is, what happens if we enter a prolonged soft used car market? What sort of strategies would you be offering to clients? And I'd like to have Steve Armstrong address that. What's your opinion on that, Steve?
Well, I think like I mentioned before, extensions on current leases, if that's the case, deciding where's the best place to sell whatever the unique product is. You don't need You don't need all-wheel drive vehicles in Florida, and you don't need two-wheel drive vehicles in New York. So you really have to be creative about that. You really have to be creative. I think it was Cindy that said earlier, which really stuck in my head, is we can't overreact. And there's a short-term, a mid-term, a long-term, and then a super long-term plan. And all of us do that, and all of us have those conversations with our clients. So we need to stick to those conversations. If the used car market stays soft for 6 months, 8 months, or it's a year, that's going to start to impact people, especially people in the service business, where those vehicles might have a couple 300,000 miles on them and might be really at the end of their life cycle. But every one is going to have to be handled kind of individually, and that's really the only way we can do this. Hope the used car market comes back. Hope the new car market comes back. We're not going to be at 18 million cars on a SAR this year for sure. Mm-hmm. So, maybe it'll be 14 or 15. Maybe we should be happy with that. But in the super long term, we're going to have to sell those cars eventually.
Well, let's look at another scenario. So one, we examined the scenario of a prolonged soft used car market. Another scenario that's got to be going through fleet managers' minds as they're strategizing for what the future actions might be. What happens if the economic recovery is not as strong as we're all hoping? What happens if it's a softer than expected economic recovery, and what strategies might you be recommending? And I'd like to pose this question to Cindy.
Yes, thanks, Mike. So there's a couple opportunities here. One would be redeploying your underutilized assets to replace some of those older assets that are at or about to pass the end of their life, right? So those old assets tend to eat up on repair dollars and having higher downtime. So, again, having a solid strategic consultant evaluate the fleet, determining where you can redeploy those underutilized assets and sell those units that are costing you money versus making you money. So that is one aspect to consider. The other, as I've mentioned, is, again, acquiring, since the market is softer and could be softer for an extended period of time, is looking for some short-term rental solutions and or buying used vehicle inventory to replace some of those older assets that are past the end of their life. Additionally, offering some of these vehicles to your drivers. So if you have drivers who are interested in acquiring those underutilized assets, looking to them to acquire those vehicles is an opportunity as well. So again, this is a win-win strategy for both the fleet manager and the employees who are acquiring vehicles at a lower retail price. So those are just a couple of opportunities that fleets can consider when we're dealing with this softer market.
Mm-hmm. I have a question here from an upfitter, and he's addressing this to the entire panel, and this is what it states. It says, I'd like to ask the panelists what actions we, meaning upfitters, could take or change to our processes during this crisis that would help them in dealing with the challenges they face. What do you want to see from your upfit partners versus things that are frustrating to you? Anyone want to tackle that question?
Who wants to go first?
You could go first.
Yeah, go ahead, Ted.
All right, great. So Mike, this is Ted. I think certainly with upfit partners, but with all partners right now, communication is key, and early and often communication from our upfit partners is crucial. So we talked about the demands and constraints on transportation, and they continue to do a great job getting vehicles built, and the throughput remains high. But we need as much time as possible to put a plan in place to get those vehicles in the hands of the end users. So if we can get communication and early communication on plans to complete, on throughput commitments and availability of vehicles when they come through the upfitter, we can do a whole lot more to make sure that the balance of the supply chain to the end user is also efficient and effective.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, this
Somebody
is
else
Angie.
wanted.
I
Go ahead.
agree with what Ted said, that clear and better communication would be key for us, particularly so that we can have that communication back to our clients so they understand, when they'll get that vehicle, what the status is. So, yeah, I echo everything he said.
Okay.
This is Cindy
go ahead.
Gomez. Oh, I'm sorry. I just wanted to add to that. While I agree the communication is absolutely key, I would like the upfitters to also consider who they're utilizing as suppliers. What are the current lead times due to this pandemic that is delaying some of the materials that they need to finish those upfit items, that is increasing the order to delivery time? And then communicating that out and potentially ordering materials sooner versus later. I know they have a tendency to wait for to order materials with the timing of when the assets are going to arrive. But in this day and age, there could be longer lead times on actual materials that they're outsourcing and obtaining from different suppliers, and they need to consider that. So that would be my one takeaway.
Okay. Well, while you have the floor there, Cindy, I'd like to pose our last question in terms of long-term acquisition strategies. Looking to the long term, what kind of advice would you give to fleet managers that are listening to this webinar?
So I want to start off this conversation by saying, by no means has any OEM given me this insight. I have not heard from any OEM. This is information that, from my experience, is what I'm anticipating happening and what you guys as fleet managers need to do to keep a lookout from a financial perspective, okay? So again, OEMs have not given me any of this information. This is just my perspective and for things for our fleet managers to watch out for. So new model year price increase. Typically we see about 2 to 3% price increase if a vehicle is not going through a major redesign. But it's going to be interesting to see if there's going to be any higher price increases occurring for the next model year due to the fact that OEMs plants have closed for an extended period of time. And I can't even imagine the financial impact that they have been experiencing. So the question and things you need to keep an eye on is, will OEMs have a higher price increase on the next model year? Will they decontent options within packages to accommodate an increased price and an individual price point to reduce some of the exposure that they've had over the past few months due to this crisis? So now more than ever, it's going to be important for fleet managers when they are evaluating their vehicle selector and creating them, is comparing those units to the previous model year to make sure that the pricing is in line based on the option content that you have selected. So that is one area that I want to caution. What is this going to do for incentive programs, right? So is there going to be a decrease in the different fleet incentives, retail rebates that are offered? So those are things that you need to consider when you're evaluating and negotiating your terms. And then, as customers acquire vehicles out of dealer inventory, there is a chance, right? We're experiencing some dealers in certain areas where there's a reduction in inventory. And what does that mean? It's going to increase the out of stock, the dealer cost, right? They're going to charge a higher markup, a more premium than they normally would. So again, working with your fleet management company, identifying the opportunities on how to reduce the cost, ensuring that you're looking at the price points over the next 6 months to ensure that you have evaluated and you're getting the price that you need from an acquisition to keep your acquisition spend down. So those are the kind of areas that, again, those are my take. The OEMs have not provided any insight on this. This is just my experience and my caution to our fleet managers.
Well, that definitely gives plenty of food for thought there, Cindy. That was an excellent assessment on some long-term strategies and scenarios that we might need to be looking at. But as I'm looking at my time here, we're a little beyond the 1 hour that we scheduled. This is a huge topic. We could go on easily for another half hour, but in courtesy to the attendees, I'd like to thank all of the panelists for some excellent insights into what's going on in the marketplace now. And if there are any questions from the attendees that might not have been addressed in our discussion, we'll still continue to take questions from the audience, so email those over and we'll respond to you. So with that, I'd like to thank the panel once again. It was an excellent job, and I'd like to thank all of the attendees for taking time out of their day to listen to our presentation. So with that, thank you, and would like to conclude with our final slide. We're all in this together. We're all kind of finding our way through a very unprecedented market. And with that, I'd like to thank you all and wish everyone a safe time. So with that, thank you very much.